Hello, and welcome to History Sleep Theatre. Tonight, we are allowing the noise and the light of the modern world to fall away. We are not just closing our eyes. We are opening a door to a time long past, a place built of timber, turf, and firelight. Our destination is 9th century Scandinavia, the heart of what would come to be known as the Viking Age. But we are not seeking grand battles or the clash of steel. Not yet. We are seeking something quieter, more fundamental. We are seeking the world of the Norsemen as they lived it, a world of creaking oaken beams, the deep and steady crackle of a central hearth, and the profound silence of a northern winter night. The air here is thick with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, a place where stories were currency and survival was a craft, honed over generations. Our journey tonight will be a quiet one, unfolding in 4 parts. First, we will settle into the very rhythm of daily life, immersing ourselves in the smoky confines of a Viking longhouse to understand the foundation of this world. From there, we will follow the saga-worthy path of a remarkable and formidable woman, whose ambition carried her across the storm-tossed Atlantic. After her story, we will delve into a mystery unearthed from the Norwegian soil, a ship burial that holds more questions than answers about power, ritual, and the reach of the Viking world. And finally, we will find ourselves as silent observers at a Jarl's winter feast, contrasting the candlelit revelry of the elite with the quiet toil of those who serve them. There is nothing you need to do now. There are no facts to memorize, no timelines to master. Simply find a comfortable position. Let your breathing slow to a gentle, steady rhythm. Feel the weight of your body as it settles, and allow the gentle cadence of the past to be your guide towards a deep and restful sleep. Let us begin. Segment 1. Why you wouldn't last a day in a Viking longhouse. Our journey begins not with a dragon-proud ship on a stormy sea, nor with the glint of an axe in the morning sun. It begins in darkness, a deep, profound darkness, punctuated only by the faint, ruby-red glow of dying embers in the center of a long, narrow hall. Imagine yourself coming to consciousness here. The first thing you notice is not light, but a profound and pervasive chill. It is a damp, unyielding cold that seems to radiate upwards from the very ground beneath you. You are lying not on a soft mattress, but on a raised wooden platform, perhaps softened by a straw-filled pallet and covered with a heavy animal hide. The floor of the hall is not wood or stone, but packed earth, trodden down by generations of feet, both human and animal. It is hard, uneven, and relentlessly cold. As you lie there, another sense awakens. The sense of smell. The air in this longhouse is thick, heavy, and utterly alien to the modern nose. It is a complex tapestry of scents, woven together into a single, inescapable atmosphere. The dominant note is peat smoke from the central fire pit. It's an earthy, acrid smell that stings the eyes and coats the back of the throat. This fire is never truly extinguished. It is the lifeblood of the home, and its smoke, with no chimney to guide it, simply drifts upwards, finding its slow way out through a hole in the thatched or turf-covered roof. Over the years, it has blackened the great wooden beams above you to a deep, sooty. Beneath the smoke, there are other scents. There is the close, warm smell of unwashed bodies, perhaps 30 or 40 people, your entire extended family, sharing this single, cavernous room. And mixed with that is the even more pungent aroma of livestock. In the depths of a Scandinavian winter, the family's most valuable animals are cow or 2, some goats. Perhaps a few pigs are brought inside to protect them from the lethal cold. They live at one end of the longhouse, separated from the humans by a simple partition, or perhaps by nothing at all. Their animal breath, their body heat, their waste it all becomes part of the shared air. It is a smell of survival, a constant reminder of the thin wall separating life from death in this harsh climate. Now, listen. The silence of the night is being replaced by the first, subtle sounds of the day. It is not an alarm, but a gentle stirring, the soft grunt of a pig, the rustle of straw as someone else begins to move, a low cough from across the hall, the almost imperceptible sigh of the wind as it presses against the watland door walls. This is the predawn world of the 9th century. Your day begins before the sun's. The first task, for someone, is to coax the fire back to life. You might watch as a figure moves slowly towards the central hearth. They carefully place dried kindling and new blocks of peat onto the glowing embers, blowing gently, patiently, until a small flame flickers and this fire is everything. It is warmth, it is light, and it is the means to cook the day's meager meals. Once the fire is established, the real chores begin. A young boy might be tasked with leading the animals out to a small, fenced enclosure for the day, his breath pluming in the frigid air. A woman might take up to heavy wooden buckets and begin the first of many trips to the nearby stream or well. Imagine the shock of the cold as she pushes aside the heavy hide flap that serves as a door. The air outside is like glass, sharp and clear. The ground is frozen solid. She might have to break a layer of ice on the water's surface to fill her buckets, her knuckles turning red and raw. The journey back, with the heavy bucket sloshing and pulling at her arms, is a small, daily struggle against the elements. Inside, the Longhouse is slowly coming to life, illuminated by the growing fire and perhaps one or two tallow lamps. These lamps, little more than a hollowed-out stone or a clay dish filled with animal fat, and a wick of moss or rush, give off a dim, sputtering, greasy light. They smell faintly of burnt fat and cast deep, dancing shadows that make the vast room feel both intimate and menacing. In this flickering gloom, the endless work unfolds. For the women of the Longhouse, the day is a cycle of repetitive, essential tasks. A significant portion of their lives is spent at the loom. Picture a warp-weighted loom, a large wooden frame that leans against one of the timber support posts of the hall. Long vertical threads, the warp, are held taut by a row of baked clay or stone weights that hang near the floor. The process of weaving is a slow, rhythmic, and physically demanding one. The weaver stands, passing a shuttle with the weft thread back and forth, beating the new thread upwards into the growing cloth with a wooden pin or a sword beater. The sound is a soft, percussive beat, a constant background noise in the Longhouse. The clink of the loom weights, the scrape of the beat. The material is wool, thick and greasy with natural lanolin, which gives it a distinctive, sheep-like smell and helps to make the final cloth water. Before it can be woven, this wool must be cleaned, carded, and spun into thread using a drop spindella. Simple stick with a weighted whirl of stone or bone. Spinning is a task that can be done almost anywhere, anytime. A woman might spin while watching the cooking pot, while walking, while talking. Her hands are never idle. The creation of cloth is not a hobby, it is a vital industry, for warm clothing is as crucial to survival as food and shelter. And then there is the woolen tunics, linen undergarments, leather shoes. Everything is precious. Nothing is thrown away. A hole in a tunic is not a reason to discard it. It is a call to work. By the poor light of the fire, a woman might sit for hours with a fine needle, often carved from bone, meticulously darning a tear, her eyes straining in the gloom. The stitches might be rough, but they are strong. They will add another season of life to the garment. Meanwhile, other work must be done to secure the family's food supply. If it is autumn, after the fishing season, a corner of the Longhouse might be dedicated to preserving the catch. Imagine the sight of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of salted and dried fish-card herring haddock hanging from the rafters, their silvery bodies twisting slowly in the smoky air. The smell of salt and drying fish would join the complex perfume of the hall. The work itself is monotonous and messy. Gutting the fish, rubbing them with coarse salt, and packing them into large barrels to be stored for the long, lean months of winter. And what are the food that results from all this labor? The daily diet is, by our standards, profoundly monotonous. The heart of every meal is a porridge, or it is made by boiling barley, oats, or rye in water, or, on a good day, it is cooked slowly in a large cauldron, suspended over the central fire. Imagine a bowl of this porridge. It is thick, lumpy, and grayish. Its flavor is bland, earthy, perhaps slightly smoky from the fire. This is the fuel that powers the day's work. Alongside the gruel there might be a piece of dense, dark bread made from barley or rye flour. There will almost certainly be butter and a simple cheese called The butter is not the sweet, creamy product we know today. It was often stored for long periods, developing a sharp, tangy, almost rancid flavor that was not only accepted but likely preferred. It was a source of precious fat and calories. Meat is a rarity. While the family might own a cow, it is far more valuable for its milk, and as a draft animal, than for its meat. A pig might be slaughtered for a special occasion, like the midwinter festival of Yule. The smell of roasting meat filling the Longhouse would have been an event in itself, a moment of extraordinary luxury. More common might be a stew, with a few pieces of salted pork or mutton flavoring the broth, bulked out with dried peas, beans, and whatever hardy root vegetables could be stored through the winter. Celebrations call for drink. Water and milk are the daily beverages, but for a feast, or to honor a guest, out comes the ale or mead. The ale is thick, dark, and nutritious, brewed from barley. Mead, a fermented honey wine, is sweeter and more potent, a drink for chieftains and for special oaths. To drink your fill of mead was a sign of immense prosperity, a brief, warm escape from the hardships of the everyday. And those hardships are woven into the very fabric of life here. Personal hygiene is a constant struggle, while archaeological finds of tweezers, ear scoops, and finely toothed combs of bone and antler show that the Norse were concerned with grooming. The conditions made cleanliness a challenge. Lice and fleas are a simple fact of life, an unwelcome but accepted part of sharing your home with animals and your bed with straw. The battle against them is a daily, and often losing, one. The cold is a more serious enemy. Frostbite is a real and present danger. A moment of carelessness, a poorly insulated shoe, a glove lost while working outside it could mean the loss of a finger or a toe. Such an injury would not just be painful, it would be a permanent disability, a lifelong reminder of the unforgiving nature of the northern world. People move with a constant awareness of the cold, bundling themselves in layers of wool and hide, stuffing their leather shoes with dry grass or moss for insulation. Then there is the matter of sanitation. With no indoor plumbing, waste is dealt with in the simplest way possible. A designated spot some distance from the Longhouse serves as the latrine, but in the middle of a blizzard, or in the dead of a freezing night, a trip outside is a daunting prospect. This is the purpose of the honey bucket, as it is sometimes euphemistically called a simple wooden pail kept in a corner. Its use is a practical necessity, but one that adds another layer to the already thick atmosphere of the house. The midnight trip to empty it is a cold, lonely, and deeply unpleasant chore. Yet, this life is not one of unceasing misery. There is community here, and there is culture. As darkness falls and the day's labor is done, the family gathers around the central hearth. The fire is built up, casting a warm, comforting glow. This is the time for stories. Imagine the scene. The shadows have reclaimed the corners of the hall. The faces of your family are illuminated by the flickering flames. A respected elder, or perhaps a traveling scord, a professional poet, clears his throat. Silence falls. The stories they tell are not simple fairy tales. They are the history of the clan, the genealogies that connect them to legendary heroes and to the gods themselves. They are tales of courage, betrayal, and magic. They are the sagas. But even here, in this moment of communal warmth, there are rules. Storytime has its own etiquette, and a misstep can be dangerous. Norse society is built upon a fierce and fragile code of honor. A man's reputation, his dry, is his most valuable possession. In the telling of a tale, a poet might praise the deeds of one family's ancestor while subtly mocking another's. A pointed look, a laugh at the wrong moment, a perceived slight and a verse in the close, tense atmosphere of the Longhouse. These things can fester. A casual insult could be interpreted as a challenge to one's honor, demanding a response. And in this society, the response could escalate with terrifying speed, from a heated argument to a drawn knife, sparking a blood feud that could tear a family, or even a community, apart for generations. So you learn to listen. You learn to watch. You understand that words have weight, that a glance can be as powerful as a blow. The warmth of the fire is matched by the tension of social obligation. This was the rhythm of the Longhouse, a life lived in close quarters, a constant negotiation between cooperation and conflict. It was a life of endless, demanding presence, a world governed by the changing seasons, the enduring fire, and the fragile, powerful bonds of kinship. It is from this world of smoke and shadow, of toil and tradition, that great ambitions would sometimes rise, ambitions that would lead certain individuals far from the familiar shores of their homeland, out onto the vast and unknown sea. Segment R. The biography. The fearless sister Vinland from the shared, smoky confines of the Longhouse. Our focus now narrows to a single individual, a woman whose story, as it has come down to us, is so filled with ambition, conflict, and brutal resolve that it has echoed for 1,000 years. Her name is Eiríksdóttir, and her life was lived on the very edge of the known world. To understand, you must first understand her family. She was the daughter of the infamous Eric the Red, the man whose violent temper led to his exile from Norway, and then from Iceland, ultimately driving him to discover and settle the vast icy land he cunningly named Greenland. She was also the sister or perhaps half-sister, of Leif Erikson, the celebrated explorer credited with being the first European to set foot in North America. Hers was a family forged in exile, defined by exploration, and possessed of a restless, indomitable will. They were not people who accepted the world as it was. They pushed its boundaries, grew up in this environment, at the Greenland settlement of Ajor, a sliver of habitable land carved into surrounded by a world of stone ice and unforgiving sea. Life here was even more precarious than in Norway. The growing season was shorter, the winters longer and darker. Timber was so scarce, it had to be imported or scavenged as driftwood. Every resource was precious, and survival depended on a hard-headed pragmatism. This was the landscape that shaped her. We can imagine her as a child, not with the soft comforts we know, but with a sharp wind on her face, and the knowledge that life was a constant struggle. Any temper she possessed would have been forged here, not in fire, but in ice. Our knowledge of comes primarily from two sources: the Vinland sagas, the saga of the Greenlanders, and Eric the Red's saga, but literary narratives, written down centuries after the events they describe. They are a blend of memory, genealogy, and artistry, and they often disagree on the details. In the story of their paint starkly different portraits of the same woman. In Eric the Red's saga, joins a large expedition to Vinland, the land of vines and timber that Leif had discovered. She is depicted as a formidable and courageous presence. The saga recounts a tense encounter where the Norse settlers are suddenly attacked by the native inhabitants, whom they called The Norsemen, caught by surprise, begin to fall back in disarray. It is in this moment of panic that emerges. The saga tells us that she, heavily pregnant at the time, calls out to the fleeing men, "Why do you run from such pitiful wretches? Stout men that you are, when it seems to me that you could slaughter them like cattle. If I had a weapon, I believe I would fight better than any of you." Seeing a sword lying on the ground next to a fallen countryman, she snatches it up. In a strange and startling display, she pulls one of her breasts from her tunic and slaps the flat of the sword against it. The saga describes this gesture as so fierce and unexpected that the attacking Skrillingar are stunned into stopping. They are terrified by this wild display, and they turn and flee. In this version of her story is a hero. Her unconventional, raw courage saves the expedition. She is a woman of action and unshakable nerve. But it is the other tale, from the saga of the Greenlanders, that has become her defining legacy. It is a much darker and more complex story, and it begins, as many sagas do, with a desire for wealth and renown. After several successful expeditions to Vinland led by her brothers, feeling that her own status had been overlooked, decided she would lead her own voyage. She approached two Icelandic brothers, Helgi and Finnbogi, who had recently arrived in Greenland with their own ship. She proposed a joint venture to Vinland, with both parties taking an equal number of men and sharing the profits, 50-50. The brothers, eager for the riches Vinland promised, readily agreed. Here, the saga introduces the first note of deception. Went to her brother Leif and asked for permission to use the large houses he had built in Vinland. Leif agreed she could use them, but he would not give them to her outright. A secret arrangement was also made. While she had agreed to take 30 fighting men, the same as the brothers, she quietly hid another 5 men on her ship. It was a small act of treachery that would give her a critical advantage later on. The two ships made the long and difficult journey across the Atlantic. Having sailed faster, arrived first. When Helgi and Finnbogi arrived, they found that and her larger party had already moved into Leif's houses, claiming the superior lodging for themselves and forcing the Icelanders to build their own shelter nearby. It was a clear power play, and the first seed of mistrust was sown. The winter that followed was tense. The two groups kept mostly to themselves, but small disagreements began to fester. The saga tells us that the Icelanders and the Greenlanders stopped mingling, and that no one from one camp would visit the other. The promise of a shared, profitable venture had curdled into a cold and suspicious standoff, thousands of miles from home. It was who brought the conflict to its grim conclusion. One morning, very early, she rose from her bed and walked barefoot through the cold, wet grass to the hut where the Icelandic brothers slept. She called to Finnbogi, who came to the door. She told him that she wished to trade her smaller ship for their larger one, as she wanted to leave Vinland. He agreed, and she returned to her own house. When she climbed back into her cold bed, her husband Thorvard awoke and asked where she had been. Her feet were icy cold. It is here that unleashes her plan. Crying, She tells her husband a lie. She claims that the brothers Helgi and Finnbogi had struck and mistreated her when she went to ask for their ship. She accused her husband of being a coward, unwilling to avenge her honor. "I can see now that I am not in Greenland," she said, goading him. "Unless you avenge me, I will divorce you." In Norse society, an insult to a man's wife was an insult to him. To fail to respond was to lose one's honor completely. Goaded by her words and bound by this rigid code, Thorvard could see only one course of action. He roused his men. They armed themselves and moved silently towards the Icelandic camp. What followed was a brutal and one-sided affair. The Icelanders were taken completely by surprise as they slept. Thorvard's men moved through the hut, binding each man before leading him outside. The saga is stark in its description. One by one, as they were brought out, the men from the Icelandic ship met their end. Soon, all the men of Helgi and Finnbogi's party lay dead. But a problem remained. There were 5 women in the Icelandic camp, and none of Thorvard's men would lay a hand on them. It was a line they would not cross. The saga then paints its darkest and most chilling portrait. Seeing the men's hesitation, she spoke with cold fury. "Hand me an axe," she said. An axe was given to her, and in a final, grim act to ensure there would be no witnesses left to contradict her version of events, the saga tells us that herself extinguished the lives of the 5 women. After the deed was done, showed her calculating nature. She threatened her own men with death if they ever spoke of the killings. They were to say that the Icelanders had simply stayed behind in Vinland when they returned to Greenland. She claimed all of the Icelanders' riches, loading their valuable ship with timber and other goods. She returned to Greenland a wealthy woman, rewarding her men for their silence. But such a dark secret could not be kept forever. Rumors began to circulate. Word eventually reached her brother, Leif Erikson, who was the chieftain in Greenland. Leif, deeply disturbed, personally interrogated 3 of his men until they confessed the entire story under duress. The saga says that Leif found the story repellent. He did not have it in his heart to punish his sister as she deserved, but he delivered a grim prophecy. He said that he believed and her husband would have little prosperity for the rest of their lives, and that their descendants would not thrive. And so, who had sailed for wealth and renown was left with both. But at the cost of her reputation, she became a pariah, a dark figure in her community's memory. So who was the real? Was she the valiant shield maiden of one saga, or the cruel and treacherous manipulator of the other? We are left to wonder as we drift on the currents of sleep. Was her story recorded by men who were threatened by a powerful, ambitious woman who refused to abide by their rules? Or was she truly a person whose character was as hard and unforgiving as the landscape that raised her? Perhaps the story was simply a good one, embellished around the hearth for dramatic effect, a cautionary tale about greed and dishonor. The truth of her character remains shrouded in the mists of time, a ghost in the pages of the sagas. Her story, whether wholly true or partially embellished, reminds us that the Norse world was not just one of men and their ambitions. It was a world where women, too, could strive for power, could command ships, and could be architects of their own fate, for better or for worse. Her story, like so many others, eventually found its end, buried by time. Just as other great Norse legacies were buried in the earth itself, waiting centuries to be Segment 3. The mystery of the Oseberg ship burial. Our journey now takes us away from the living sagas, with their spoken words and heroic deeds, and into the silent, waiting soil of Norway. We move from stories told around a fire to a story unearthed from the dark, damp earth. A mystery that lay sleeping in a farmer's field for more than 1,000 years. This is the story of the Oseberg ship, a discovery so profound and richly detailed that it changed our understanding of the artistry, the ritual, and the very fabric of power in the Viking Age. Imagine the landscape of Vestfold County, near the coast of the Os. It is a place of rolling green hills, fertile farmland, and deep inlets of the sea. For countless generations, a particular farm near Tansberg, the Oseberg farm, had a large, long mound on its property. Known to all simply as Haugen the Mound, it was a familiar feature, a gentle swelling of the earth covered in wild grasses and heather, grazed by sheep and passed by daily without a second thought. Local folklore might have whispered of ancient kings or buried treasure, the kind of stories that attach themselves to such places, but it remained a simple part of the scenery. Then, in the late summer of 1903, the farmer who owned the land, a man named Knut Rom, let his curiosity get the better of him. Perhaps it was a slow day, or perhaps the old stories worked on his imagination. Realizing he had stumbled upon something far beyond local folklore, he contacted the authorities in Oslo. The following summer, in June of 1904, the archaeologist Gabriel Gustafsson arrived with his team. As they began a systematic excavation, the sheer scale and importance of the find became breathtakingly clear. This was not just a piece of a ship. This was a whole ship, almost perfectly intact, interred in a massive, man-made tomb. The reason for its incredible preservation lay in the geology of the burial itself. The Norse people who had performed this rite had first dug a deep trench into the natural blue clay of the ground. After placing the ship and its contents inside, they had built a high cairn of heavy stones over the entire vessel, before finally covering it all with a massive mound of peat and turf, sealing it from the world. This combination of dense clay and the heavy, packed mound created a perfectly anaerobic environment. Without oxygen, the microorganisms that caused decay could not survive. The ship had been sleeping in a hermetically sealed chamber for 11 centuries, but this miracle of preservation presented an immense challenge. The excavation was a slow, deliberate, and nerve-wracking process. The wood, while looking solid, was thoroughly waterlogged and had the structural consistency of wet cardboard. Each piece, from the largest whole plank to the smallest carved fragment, had to be carefully freed from the clay, meticulously documented, and then wrapped in damp moss for its journey to the laboratory in Oslo. If any piece were allowed to dry out too quickly, it would shrink, crack, and crumble into unrecognizable dust, and a piece of history would be lost forever. At the university, an unprecedented conservation effort began, one that would stretch for nearly 20 years. The science of preserving waterlogged wood was in its infancy. The team decided on a painstaking method. The wooden fragments were submerged in vast vats of heated alum, a waxy, water-soluble salt. Over a period of years, the alum would slowly penetrate the wood, molecule by molecule, displacing the water and crystallizing within the cellular structure, giving it stability. It was a slow, tedious, and uncertain process. Decades later, in the 21st century, conservators would discover the alum was degrading and begin a new, even more advanced preservation project using modern polymers, ensuring the ship can continue to tell its story. And what a story it tells. The ship itself is a masterpiece. It is not a longship, the fearsome vessel of war and raiding, but a smaller, more graceful ship designed for travel along the coast and through the sheltered fjords. It is about 70 feet long and 16 feet wide, clinker-built from magnificent oak planks, its elegant lines speaking of speed, status, and ceremony. It was a vessel for being seen, but what truly holds the eye is the carving. This is no mere boat, it is a floating sculpture. The prow soars upwards in a beautiful curve, terminating in the exquisitely carved head of a serpent, its mouth open in a silent roar. The stone mirrors it, coiled like the serpent's tail, completing the creature's form. And nearly every available wooden surface, the prow, the stern, the tiller, the wind vanes, is covered in a breathtaking profusion of intricate, low-relief carvings. Imagine a disciplined chaos of interwoven animal forms, the signature gripping beast motif of the era. Stylized creatures, part lion, part dog, part bird, part serpent, contort and intertwine in a complex, flowing pattern. Their ribbon-like bodies knot around each other, their claws gripping their own necks or the bodies of their neighbors, their heads turned back to bite the very frame of the carving. The precision and artistic confidence are astounding, the work of a master carver at the absolute height of his powers. Triering dating reveals the ship was built around 820s, making it already old and treasured when it was buried 14 years later, a venerated heirloom chosen for this final, sacred journey. Inside the ship, amidships, the team found a burial chamber constructed of timber, and within that chamber lay the very heart of the mystery. The jumbled skeletal remains of two women. For over a century, their identities have been the subject of intense and evolving debate. The initial analysis revealed one woman was old, likely between 70 and 80. Her bones told a story not just of age, but of a difficult life, showing signs of severe arthritis. Later analysis using modern techniques revealed she likely suffered from advanced cancer, which must have caused her considerable pain. The other woman was younger, around 50 years old. Her skeleton was healthier. Who were they? The sheer opulence of the burial, grander than any other known from this period, immediately suggested the older woman was a person of the highest rank, a powerful queen, perhaps. Some scholars connected her to the Ynglinga saga, theorizing she could be Queen Sahay, the grandmother of Harald Fairhair, the man who would unite Norway into a single kingdom. The sagas placed her in this region at this time, but it remains a tantalizing, unprovable theory. Another compelling theory is that she was not a queen in the political sense, but a Valve, a powerful seeress or priestess. In Norse society, a Valva was a figure of immense spiritual authority, a woman who could practice the magical arts of seer, communicating with spirits and foretelling the future. They were both respected and feared. This theory is bolstered by some of the grave goods, including a wooden staff reminiscent of the ritual staffs associated with seeresses, and a small leather pouch containing cannabis seeds, which could have been used to induce a trance state for ritual purposes. And what of the younger woman? For decades, the assumption was that she was a servant or a thrall, a human sacrifice killed to accompany a mistress into the afterlife. A grim but known practice. But modern science has told a different story. Analysis of her teeth and bones revealed a diet rich in protein, similar to the older woman's, suggesting a life of privilege, not servitude. She was not a lowly servant. This deepens the mystery. Was she a relative, a younger queen, and her powerful mother, a political ally? Or was she, perhaps, the revered priestess's chosen successor, the two of them laid to rest together to ensure the continuity of their spiritual lineage? The grave is silent. It presents us with two powerful women, entombed together in unparalleled splendor, but it refuses to whisper their names or the nature of their bond. The splendor they were buried with, however, speaks volumes. The grave goods of the Oseberg ship are a breathtaking collection, a material library of 9th century elite life. There were the remains of 4 intricately carved wooden Imagine these sleighs, not as simple tools for getting through snow, but as ceremonial vehicles, works of art meant to glide through the winter landscape. Each is unique, its posts carved into snarling, 3-dimensional animal heads. There was a magnificent wooden bed, also ornately carved, several chests, buckets, and a full array of kitchen implements. Most remarkably, there was a 4-wheeled cart, the only complete Viking Age cart ever found, which could be cleverly disassembled, a testament to its builder's ingenuity. Then there were the textiles, a fragile treasure. Though many were mere fragments, archaeologists painstakingly recovered the ghosts of magnificent tapestries. These were not abstract patterns, but woven pictures, narrative scenes from a mythology we can no longer fully decipher. On one famous fragment, we see a procession of figures in ceremonial dress, some on horseback, some in wagons, some walking. Above them, figures appear to be hanging from a tree, a possible link to the god Odin and rituals of sacrifice. These tapestries are a precious, silent record of beliefs and ceremonies that were never recorded in writing. They also found fragments of imported silk, a material so luxurious it could only have come from the great empires to the east, the Byzantine or Persian courts. Perhaps the most enigmatic and far-traveled artifact of all is a simple ewered bucket, now famously known as the Buddha bucket. The bucket itself is of fine local craftsmanship, but it is the ornamentation on its handle that has puzzled scholars for a century. The 2 brass escutcheons where the handle attaches to the rim are decorated with enamel, a difficult technique of fusing glass to metal, one not practiced in Scandinavia at the time. And the figures depicted are 2 men in robes, sitting with their legs crossed in a way that is strikingly similar to the lotus position of Buddhist statuary. This single object explodes any simple idea of an isolated, insular Viking world. The enamel work is almost certainly Celtic, originating from a workshop in Ireland or Britain, a place the Norsemen knew well through both raiding and trade. The imagery, while not a true depiction of the Buddha, suggests a startling awareness of distant Eastern spiritual art. How did this object, a fusion of Celtic craftsmanship and remote Eastern influence, find its way into the grave of a Norse noblewoman in Norway? Was it treasure looted in a raid, a high-status gift from a foreign, an item acquired through peaceful trade? We will never know for sure, but its very existence testifies to the complex web of interactions that defined the age. The Buddha bucket, the silks from the East, the walnuts from Persia, the feathers of a peacock. These items paint a vivid picture. They show us that the Viking world was a hub of global connection. From their coastal settlements, Norse mariners sailed west to the British Isles and Iceland, south to Francia, and east across the Baltic. From there, great river systems like the Dnieper and the Volga were watery highways, leading them deep into what is now Russia and Ukraine. There, they traded furs, amber, and thralls for silver dirham coins from Baghdad and Samarkand, and for the silks and spices of Constantinople. The Oseberg burial was not just the final resting place of two women. It was a nexus point, a final destination for goods and ideas that had traveled thousands of miles by ship, by riverboat, and by camel. The Oseberg mound gave up its treasures of wood and wool and metal, but it held on to its deepest secrets. We still do not know who the women were, or why one accompanied the other in death. We do not know the full meaning of the ceremonies depicted on their precious tapestries, but the ship and its contents offer us a silent, beautiful, and deeply complex glimpse into a lost world. It was a world of profound artistry, of far-reaching connections, and of powerful women whose stories were not written in sagas, but were laid to rest with them in the earth. It reveals a world not just of survival, but of immense wealth, intricate ceremony, and rigid social hierarchy. World that existed in stark contrast to the daily life of the common farmer, yet was rooted in the very same landscape. Segment 4. Contrasting daily life. A Jarl's Winter Feast. Our journey through 9th century Scandinavia concludes where all power in this world radiates from. A Jarl, we are going to be silent observers at a winter feast, but as we watch the spectacle unfold, our eyes will also drift to the shadow. 2. The silent figures who make this luxury possible, drawing the final, stark contrast between two intertwined, yet entirely separate, realities. Imagine a longhouse, but magnified in every dimension. This is the Jarl's Hall. It is longer, wider, and taller than the simple dwelling we first visited. The central hearth is not just a fire pit, but a series of long fires stretching down the whole center, their flames leaping high, casting a brilliant, dancing light that banishes the oppressive darkness of the northern winter. The smoke still gathers in the rafters, but the hall is so vast that the air feels cleaner, warmer. The rough timber posts that support the roof are massive, some perhaps even carved with runes or protective symbols. And unlike the bare woodland orb of a farmer's home, the walls here are adorned. Great colorful tapestries, much like the ones laid to rest in the Oseberg ship, hang between the support posts. They depict scenes of heroic battles, mythical beasts, and the great deeds of the Jarl's ancestors. They are not just decoration, they are a declaration of lineage and power, and they serve a practical purpose, too, blocking the drafts that seep through the wooden walls. The floor is still packed to earth, but it is strewn thickly with fresh, fragrant rushes and herbs, which release a pleasant scent as they are trod upon. The feast is called to mark the midpoint of winter, a celebration of survival and a prayer for the sun's return. As dusk falls, the guests begin to arrive. They are the Jarl's key retainers, his herd, loyal warriors who form his bodyguard. There are also neighboring landowners, allies bound by marriage or treaty, and perhaps a traveling merchant of high status. They enter the hall, their heavy woolen cloaks dusted with snow, their breath pluming in the cold air of the doorway before they step into the enveloping warmth. Their boots are scraped clean by a thrall at the door, a gesture they barely notice. The seating arrangement is a map of the social order, rigid and understood by all. In the center of one of the long walls is the high seat, a raised, ornately carved chair where the Jarl sits. Beside him is his wife, the lady of the hall, her keys to the household food stores hanging from her belt as a symbol of her domestic authority. This is the epicenter of power. The most honored guests, the most famous warriors, the wealthiest allies are seated on the same bench as the Jarl close to the high seat. The further one sits from the Jarl, down the long, parallel benches that line the hall, the lower one's status. A young warrior, new to the Jarl's service, might find himself at the far end, near the doors, in the draft, and he would know his place. To be invited to move up the bench is a great honor. To be moved down, a public humiliation. As the guests find their places, the work of the feast begins for those who will not be partaking in it. These are the thralls, the enslaved people who form the backbone of the Jarl's wealth. They move through the hall with a practiced quietness, their faces impassive. They are, in the eyes of the feasting Norse, largely invisible, a part of the hall's machinery. A young boy, no older than 12, struggles with a heavy wooden bucket of ale. A woman with tired eyes and rough hands places wooden trenchers and drinking horns on the tables. They move with an economy of motion, their focus entirely on their tasks, their presence acknowledged only when a horn needs refilling or a spill needs to be wiped away with a handful of rushes. And then, the food arrives. This is a display of wealth meant to overwhelm the senses. The memory of the farmer's thin barley gruel evaporates in an instant. Thralls emerge from the cooking end of the hall bearing enormous wooden platters. On one, a whole roasted reindeer, its antlers still attached, steam rising from its glistening hide. On another, a wild boar, roasted on a spit until its skin is crisp, an apple in its mouth. There are pots of stew, thick with meat and enriched with wild mushrooms. There are grilled fish, loaves of fine wheat, bread a rare luxury, and bowls of cheese and butter. The air grows thick with the scent of roasting meat, of herbs, of baking bread. To drink, there is not just the standard dark ale, but a special hazelnut or juniper-infused brew reserved for the finest occasions. And for the highest-ranking guests on the Jarl's own bench, there is something even more precious. A thrall carefully pours a deep red liquid from a large clay amphora into their silver-rimmed drinking horns. It is wine imported at immense cost from the vineyards of France. To taste this foreign, sour, and potent drink is to taste the Jarl's power, his connection to the wide world. While the warriors laugh and drink deep, the thralls who serve them will later eat the scraps, the porridge scraped from the bottom of the pot, their hunger a world away from the magnificent excess they are enabling. As the eating and drinking progresses, the true business of the evening, this feast is not merely a party. It is a vital political and social institution. The Jarl is known as a ringgiver, and now he demonstrates why. He calls forward a warrior who performed bravely in the last raid. With great ceremony, the Jarl takes a heavy, twisted ring of solid gold from his own arm and slides it onto the warrior's. The warrior's face shines with pride. This ring is not just payment. It is a tangible bond. It is a symbol of the Jarl's generosity and the warrior's loyalty. By accepting the gift, the warrior is renewing his oath to fight and die for his lord. The gift-giving economy is the glue of this society. A Jarl who is miserly will soon find his hall empty of warriors. A generous one can command a fearsome army. Now, a hush falls as a man with a small, triangular harp, or perhaps a lyre, takes a seat near the high seat. This is the Skald, the court poet. He is a highly respected professional, a master of words and memory. His role is to entertain, but more importantly, to legitimize. He begins to chant, his voice rising and falling in a hypnotic cadence. He is not telling a random story. He is reciting a praise poem composed for this very occasion. He sings of the Jarl's fearsome prowess in battle, using elaborate metaphors called kennings. The Jarl is a feeder of ravens, a He recites the Jarl's genealogy, tracing his ancestry back to gods and legendary kings. He praises his unparalleled generosity, calling him a hater of gold because he gives it away so freely. This is public relations, 9th century style, cementing the Jarl's authority in the minds of all present. The warriors listen, rapt, their lord's glory reflecting onto them. The thralls continue their work, the beautiful, alliterative poetry just another sound in the noisy hall, its meaning and flattery not intended for them. Segment 4. Contrasting daily life, a Jarl's winter feast. Our journey through 9th century Scandinavia concludes where all power in this world radiates from. A Jarl we are going to be silent observers at a winter feast, but as we watch the spectacle unfold, our eyes will also drift to the shadow. 2. The silent figures who make this luxury possible, drawing the final, stark contrast between two intertwined, yet entirely separate, realities. Imagine a longhouse, but magnified in every dimension. This is the Jarl's hall. It is longer, wider, and taller than the simple dwelling we first visited. The central hearth is not just a fire pit, but a series of long fires stretching down the hall center, their flames leaping high, casting a brilliant, dancing light that banishes the oppressive darkness of the northern winter. The smoke still gathers in the rafters, but the hall is so vast that the air feels cleaner, warmer. The rough timber posts that support the roof are massive, some perhaps even carved with runes or protective symbols. And unlike the bare woodland orb of a farmer's home, the walls here are adorned. Great colorful tapestries, much like the ones laid to rest in the Osserberg ship, hang between the support posts. They depict scenes of heroic battles, mythical beasts, and the great deeds of the Jarl's ancestors. They are not just decoration, they are a declaration of lineage and power, and they serve a practical purpose, too, blocking the drafts that seep through the wooden walls. The floor is still packed to earth, but it is strewn thickly with fresh, fragrant rushes and herbs, which release a pleasant scent as they are trod upon. The feast is called to mark the midpoint of winter, a celebration of survival and a prayer for the sun's return. As dusk falls, the guests begin to arrive. They are the Jarl's key retainers, his herd loyal warriors who form his bodyguard. There are also neighboring landowners, allies bound by marriage or treaty, and perhaps a traveling merchant of high status. They enter the hall, their heavy woolen cloaks dusted with snow, their breath pluming in the cold air of the doorway before they step into the enveloping warmth. Their boots are scraped clean by a thrall at the door, a gesture they barely notice. The seating arrangement is a map of the social order, rigid and understood by all. In the center of one of the long walls is the high seat, a raised, ornately carved chair where the Jarl sits. Beside him is his wife, the lady of the hall, her keys to the household food stores hanging from her belt as a symbol of her domestic authority. This is the epicenter of power. The most honored guests, the most famous warriors, the wealthiest allies are seated on the same bench as the Jarl close to the high seat. The further one sits from the Jarl, down the long, parallel benches that line the hall, the lower one's status. A young warrior, new to the Jarl's service, might find himself at the far end, near the doors, in the draft, and he would know his place. To be invited to move up the bench is a great honor. To be moved down, a public humiliation. As the guests find their places, the work of the feast begins for those who will not be partaking in it. These are the thralls, the enslaved people who form the backbone of the Jarl's wealth. They move through the hall with a practiced quietness, their faces impassive. They are, in the eyes of the feasting Norse, largely invisible, a part of the hall's machinery. A young boy, no older than 12, struggles with a heavy wooden bucket of ale. A woman with tired eyes and rough hands places wooden trenchers and drinking horns on the tables. They move with an economy of motion, their focus entirely on their tasks. Their presence acknowledged only when a horn needs refilling or a spill needs to be wiped away with a handful of rushes. And then, the food arrives. This is a display of wealth meant to overwhelm the senses. The memory of the farmer's thin barley gruel evaporates in an instant. Thralls emerge from the cooking end of the hall bearing enormous wooden platters. On one, a whole roasted reindeer, its antlers still attached, steam rising from its glistening hide. On another, a wild boar, roasted on a spit until its skin is crisp, an apple in its mouth. There are pots of stew, thick with meat and enriched with wild mushrooms. There are grilled fish, loaves of fine wheat, bread a rare luxury, and bowls of cheese and butter. The air grows thick with the scent of roasting meat, of herbs, of baking, bread. To drink, there is not just the standard dark ale, but a special hazelnut or juniper-infused brew reserved for the finest occasions. And for the highest-ranking guests on the Jarl's own bench, there is something even more precious. A thrall carefully pours a deep red liquid from a large clay amphora into their silver-rimmed drinking horns. It is wine imported at immense cost from the vineyards of France. To taste this foreign, sour, and potent drink is to taste the Jarl's power, his connection to the wide world. While the warriors laugh and drink deep, the thralls who serve them will later eat the scraps, the porridge scraped from the bottom of the pot, their hunger a world away from the magnificent excess they are enabling. As the eating and drinking progresses, the true business of the evening, this feast is not merely a party. It is a vital political and social institution. The Jarl is known as a ringover, and now he demonstrates why. He calls forward a warrior who performed bravely in the last raid. With great ceremony, the Jarl takes a heavy, twisted ring of solid gold from his own arm and slides it onto the warrior's. The warrior's face shines with pride. This ring is not just payment. It is a tangible bond. It is a symbol of the Jarl's generosity and the warrior's loyalty. By accepting the gift, the warrior is renewing his oath to fight and die for his lord. The gift-giving economy is the glue of this society. A Jarl who is miserly will soon find his hall empty of warriors. A generous one can command a fearsome army. Now, a hush falls as a man with a small, triangular harp, or perhaps a lyre, takes a seat near the high seat. This is the Skald, the court poet. He is a highly respected professional, a master of words and memory. His role is to entertain, but more importantly, to legitimize. He begins to chant, his voice rising and falling in a hypnotic cadence. He is not telling a random story. He is reciting a praise poem composed for this very occasion. He sings of the Jarl's fearsome prowess in battle, using elaborate metaphors called kennings. The Jarl is a feeder of ravens, a battle He recites the Jarl's genealogy, tracing his ancestry back to gods and legendary kings. He praises his unparalleled generosity, calling him a hater of gold because he gives it away so freely. This is public relations, 9th century style. cementing the Jarl's authority in the minds of all present. The warriors listen, rapt, their lord's glory reflecting onto them. The thralls continue their work, the beautiful, alliterative poetry just another sound in the noisy hall, its meaning and flattery not intended for them.